Chant 1966 Mighty Trip to Dubawnt and Thelon Rivers, Canada. I hope you're following this along. This is going to be part 3, and you should have gone through part 1 and 2. Part 3 is Carey Lake to Aberdeen Lake. So there's going to be 4 parts in this video adventure. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I've dedicated this to all those who pursue science as a way of increasing our collective knowledge about the world and our place in it. And I'm going to cover here, we had a second emergency campsite, unfortunately, and then a storm hit us at Carey Lake. The Dubawnt Lake, very large lake, inlet to Grant Lake Portage, 2 miles. Black flies again. Lucky resupplies, nature photography, Marjorie Lake Inlet and route choices, and we're going to spend some time there with Tyrrell's notes on a dangerous rapid, a missing camera back reward, Aberdeen Lake, and then back to Stony Rapids at the end of our trip. So let me show you with a conventional map where we're going to go. There's Carey Lake on the to the left. Then the Dubawnt River goes up to Markham Lake, and then Nicholson Lake. You see to the left of that is something called Mosquito Lake, and as I indicated, they all could be called Mosquito Lake. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go along Dubawnt Lake, and then go over to Outlet Bay, and then following the Dubawnt River, go to the inlet of Grant Lake. That's where the big Portage is, and then start going north again up to Wharton Lake, and that leads into Marjorie Lake. And then the Dubawnt River makes a sharp turn to the northwest. That really confused Tyrrell for a while. And eventually it flows into the Thelon, Thelon River at Beverly Lake, and then that carries us to Aberdeen Lake. That's our pickup point. So Carey Lake is unfortunately the second time that one of the canoes was swamped, and then a storm hit us afterwards. I like this picture from Tyrrell, the herd of caribou. We never saw anything that dense. We did see caribou. It gives you an idea of Carey Lake. Don Chant was interviewed by the Riverside Press Enterprise, and this is what that article said, that the party's nadir came at Disaster Camp near the outlet rapids of Carey Lake. Their overloaded canoes had swamped twice. Chant wrenched a knee. In fact, he couldn't walk the next day. Chilcott suffered an internal disorder. The wind blew in gusts up to 70 miles per hour for 3 rain-swept days. And Chant is quoted as saying, "Our tent was nearly swept away. We were so low psychologically that we didn't eat for 24 hours, lay in our sleeping bags, soaking wet, seemingly unable to do anything." Well, I'll give you a view of that through my journal. July 20th, 1966, evening. Well, we haven't moved much since yesterday. We broke camp under cloudy skies and a strong wind, and faced the first rapid, which seemed to Don and Jim very shallow and a problem to find canoe clearance. But we tried to do it anyway. We stayed in the canoe down the wide first 100 feet, and everything was okay. Instead of walking after we moved up on a rock, we again paddled downstream, assuming we would just run aground. We hit ground all right, but it's knee-waist deep water and a fast current. And what happened was we started hitting these boulders, which was turning the canoe. Immediately, Jim and I got out of our canoe and prevented it from sinking because of the water she was shipping. We learned from the first rapid, and if you've been following us, you realize that's what happened. We swamped the canoes the first time. But we learned from that first rapid that getting out and holding up the canoe was our best bet, and it paid off. Don and Roger went broadside about 40 feet from us. They hit a rock and they couldn't do much. I mean, the current just, rotated them. Their canoe swamped with water. In the meantime, Jim and I managed to get the stern of our canoe on a rock and were bailing water. Our craft did not take much water on, and later we found our packs were scarcely wet on the bottom. That was due also to our putting spare oars, gun stock, etc. under the packs to raise them above the floor of the canoe. We then safely hoisted our canoe on some rocks in the rapid and went to help Don and Roger. We managed to turn their craft, put her stern on a rock, and bail enough water out of her to get her to shore. Don and Roger took so much water that on carrying a pack to shore, I discovered it was filled 1/3 with water. No wonder it was so heavy. Our next actions were to spread the food. DNR had 3/4 of the food packs, and aerial photos out to dry. The air photos were okay, but the food was all wet. In addition to these problems, it started to rain, and we had to cover the food. Firewood is about 1/3 of a mile away, actually, longer because of gods of black flies, as I can testify. We have set up camp near Don and Roger's canoe. Since ours, we were able to walk to the end of the rapids. My personal stuff, I guess I don't know how to spell personal. My personal stuff came through in fine shape, though Roger's camera again got submerged. That's about the story. Not quite yet. There was never any apprehension this morning, just anger at our own shortcomings. Another red letter cruddy day. And here's the slide I still have of disaster camp, with everybody kind of on the ground here, with Don having wrenched his knee. The next day, things went from bad to worse. It rained continuously last night, and we had to retransfer all of the wet food under a more waterproof tarp. The rain wasn't too bad, except it was accompanied by a heavy wind. The weather conditions have not eased up. Our tent has taken a beating, with poles bent, one rip about 3/4 of a foot long in the fly at one entrance, and the most serious defect, one of the two main tension bars splitting apart. This tent is presumably safe in a 90-mile-per-hour wind, but that is laughable. For breakfast this morning, I got some half-soggy ship's biscuits and honey. Since there isn't any dry wood around, we will probably use the Primus stove to cook up a stew for lunch in the tent. All of the members of our expedition, except myself, are presently huddled in sleeping bags and have not been lively all day. We have lost a day of traveling here, a day we would lose anyway. We must stay here until things dry out, obviously, and this includes a very wet supply of toilet paper. This is the worst possible weather we could have had following yesterday's mishap. The only good thing that happened was my catching a 17-pound lake trout and Don getting one of 21 pounds, which are outside the tent. Immediate food is no problem, but what will be the situation a month from now? We will have to audit our food supply and use some of the freeze-dried meat as emergency supplies. 3 problems face us. Oh, excuse these ink blots. Our makeshift tension joint for the tent caved in again. 3 problems: food, the pickup site, that's our goal, and time. Tent was leaking on Don's side all night. 7:22. The wind and rain lasted all day and night yesterday. I had to go out at 2 a.m. to fix the tent. 2 paddles are our only means of preventing the rest of the poles from collapsing. Today we have only had to fix the tent poles once. The fly is slowly being ripped to shreds above our heads. The wind isn't as bad today, and at this writing seems to have eased off. No one prepared supper last night, and we have not eaten breakfast or lunch today. The wind blew some icy water, and it's not worth the comfort of our warm sleeping bags to go outside. Don's bag is almost thoroughly wet. Roger's side of the tent is accumulating a pool of water around it. I brought my personal kit into the tent, and the outside of it is starting to become wet. So far, I have labored on this trip successfully so far to keep my cameras and other gear dry. Not much to write. We need a break in the weather. It's funny, but I've become so used to Riverside weather, Riverside, California, conditions that a continuous hard rainstorm is almost a new experience. My hands yesterday felt as cold as a winter's day without gloves in New York City. Cooked our last meal yesterday with the Primus inside the tent. Don and Roger have been spending most of the day out of sight in sleeping bags. Jim, who hasn't moved out of his bag since this started, has been reading. This means we have lost another day and may force us to abandon one of our permanent campsites. My science side of this trip, however, is probably over. I can do something with the amphibian data, very little with the mammal data. The trap success is practically zero. Birds are showing a very low diversity. I hope to bring back a fine collection of slides of this region for teaching and personal purposes. July 23rd. It cleared up a little yesterday, just enough for Don, Roger, and even Jim to dry out somewhat their sleeping bags. We had caribou and a chocolate bar for our first meal, which might have contributed to an upset stomach. The day was spent reading in bed. This wasn't much to do. Today the weather broke a little, the sun came out, and the wind slackened a bit. In the morning I gathered some firewood from what appeared to be the site of an old cabin between the rapids. We had 3 solid meals today. Don and Roger sewed up the fly and put some rivets into their canoe where one had come out and one was sprung. Jim fixed the tension poles by means of a piece of wood stuck through the rod and some sheets of aluminum around it. I don't know where we got the aluminum from. We made holes in the fly so we could guy out the 4 corners of the tent. I ordered it and cleaned up the food. We seem to be in good shape for the next 32 days for dinners, can easily supply fish, fowl, etc. for the other dinners. Our chocolate bar situation, that's really important, right, is also okay, but many of the bars have been sitting in concentrated beef or chicken bouillon and taste like it. All in all, it was a repair day and a rest day. Our confinement to the tent left me weakish, and Don felt the same also. His knee is still weak. Well, one picture is worth 10 PowerPoint text slides. And here's the picture. The tent at Carey Lake outlet after a 3-day storm. I think that after the trip was over, that Don got the money back to the grant from the manufacturer when we complained that this tent did not meet their specifications in terms of the weather. July 25th. Today we woke up early and started off by walking the rapid. We stopped after this rapid and fished for lake trout, since this may be our last opportunity for several days for this food fish. Don caught 11 fish on 18 casts. My percentage was much less. We got 16 fish between us and cleaned them on the spot. We had soup and fish for lunch. What a surprise, and fish and wet food for dinner. So we're leaving Carey. We're going up to Markham Lake. This is one of Tyrrell's maps. I wanted to include this because there's one comment made by Alan Jacobs that Tyrrell was always correct in terms of his description of the route. That's not true here. And Peter Frank's journal in the book The Barren Lands on 13 August 1955, that's Skip's book, said that we pulled out at about 10:30 and went on down to where the 15-foot falls is marked on the map. You can see that. Actually, this is an error. There was nothing there but a very easy rapid. So depending upon maybe water levels, maybe ice moving rocks, etc., things change. Things change. And in this particular case, Tyrrell's 1893 observations were not correct. All right, let's go to Dubawnt Lake. This is, you've all heard of Dubawnt Lake, right? I found out that this was the 16th largest lake in North America. And the problem here is there's ice there, even until August. So Tyrrell found that the 50-mile expanse of Dubawnt Lake almost completely frozen in mid-August. The thumb party before us, when they reached Dubawnt Lake, probably about 2 weeks before we did, found about 3/4 of the surface frozen, and they were icebound for 3 days until the wind shifted to the north and the ice moved away from the shore. However, we ran into a fishermen's group, and the bush pilot on July 30th told us that there was no ice in Dubawnt Lake, which was really good news for us. Jim, who is really an expert in terms of botany and the time that the insects were coming out, Jim says many plants which were at certain stages at Carey are 2 weeks behind here due to the frozen lake impact in mid-July. So one would expect that the season is very short here, and Jim was very attuned to that. So I'm throwing in this picture from Tyrrell from 1893. You can just see the ice on Dubawnt Lake. This was taken in mid-August of 1893. August 2nd, Dubawnt Lake. Don and Jim thought before the trip we would paddle 110 miles here because of ice conditions. We wouldn't be able to get to the open lake, but would have to cling the shore. But it now looks like we only have to do 70, of which one half is over. Once we reach the outlet of Dubawnt, we will be in good shape and easily meet the pickup destination, which was always on our mind. Could we reach that in time? We didn't want to be hung up on the Dubawnt in September. So here we have a description from August 1st. We found that the water temperature on the lake here was 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and our campsite across the way at another island, there is a chunk of ice on shore, which we will probably go over to take some pictures tomorrow. And we paid a lot of money for winter gear. We wanted to really dress with it and take pictures. Cold weather doesn't bother me too much because of the clothes I brought. I haven't used the wool pants or shirt yet, but tomorrow I will use the wool pants. The problem is I kneel at the bottom of the canoe with knees and feet touching the aluminum. It is cold, and my feet, instead of suffering from lack of circulation, which they do, but coldness. And so here we are. We dressed in our finest Arctic Explorer outfits. But this was the only ice we saw the entire time. You notice that the rocks are filled with lichens. We'll talk about lichens in a while. August 3rd. Started the day with 5 to 6 pancakes and a rodent. Actually, the rodent wasn't part of the breakfast. A very nice start. We decided since weather conditions were perfect, they were perfect, Wasn't a cloud in the sky. To attempt a straight run of 10 miles down the lake, this is very dangerous. At one point, we would be 5 miles away from land. If a squall or a heavy rainstorm hit, we would be sunk, more ways than one. We hoped that it was a boring day, and it was. We covered a spectacular 24 miles without shipping any water. The water was still and paddling perfect. To give you an idea here, this is the northern part of Dubawnt Lake. I think that's where we crossed it. We did the 10-mile stretch in about 3 hours and 15 minutes. Otherwise, we'd have to cling to the shore, and it would probably double our mileage. It would be much more difficult. But we took a chance. August 4th, supper consisted of freeze-dried pork chops and our usual fish. We decided to write a letter to one of the food manufacturers complaining about his, quote, 4 generous servings. If we didn't have the fish, things would be in bad shape. Don fished the rapids here, but couldn't find any grayling. So it turns out that, and this is from Alexander Klotz's book, my old professor at CCNY, quote, that lichens occur everywhere in the Arctic on a scale hardly found elsewhere in the world. That's what the caribou are feeding on during the winter. They are unusual plants in that they are really a combination of 2 plants, a fungus which forms the body of the lichen, and an algae. Lichens encrusting the rocks with a mantle of black, soft grays, gray-greens, and yellows. I remember from Klotz, he talked about the spruce moose forests, that's the boreal forest, and the lichens caribou. They were catchy plant animal situations. I have one slide. I think this was taken at Dubawnt Lake, showing just the variety of lichens on this one rock. Really pretty spectacular. So if you go up there, pay attention to those. Let's go up to Grant Lake and the Inlet. We're going to do a portage here of 2 miles. And this is a Tyrrell 1893 photograph. He had to have some pretty big photographic equipment to do these things. And he says this is the rapids below Dubawnt Lake, which is the entrance to Grant. And here's a Google map view of this narrow canyon and a 2 mile portage. So here we are, and I'm going to tell you about that. After a late start, we walked most of the afternoon until we hit the bad stretch, the stretch being the portage area. It was a portage of 2 miles. At least the water temperature while walking was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The black flies were horrible. I carried 2.5 loads, and the flies were so thick that at times it was difficult when the flies were not out of my eyes, should be not out of my eyes. I couldn't see the ground. We were down to 2 head nets, and I didn't have one. Carrying a 60-pound load isn't much fun on a 2 mile portage with a sleeping bag balancing on the top and some paraphernalia over in one hand. Back strain isn't bad after, well, let's see, back strain, something bad after a while, but those black flies. Yesterday AM, without any trouble, we could fill a plastic vial with 2 sweeps of black flies from the corner of the tent. I'll show you a picture of that. Pretty sure this was taken at Grant Lake. That's not dust. That's not dust. Either on the screen of the tent or in the air or in the tent. Those are black flies. You could also see a .30-30 rifle that we had with us. JB Tyrrell, that's the brother of JB, wrote an interesting book, and I really like this this section. He says, by the way, there's an Indian tradition, an Indian legend, which says that it was on these very portages, like we went on, that the Great Spirit first made black flies, just to irritate people. And our experience, we thought, would tend to bear out that belief. What was the experience of the Moffat party on the same portage? They were there a month later, on September 4th, and here's Skip's journal entry showing that that things were quite different then. Quote, "Snow greeted me this morning as I crawled out of the tent into a harsh flurry. A tiny drift had accumulated on the leeward side of the tent, and the rocks and moss were all covered with fine flakes. Water bucket was frozen solid. Canoes were carried along the rim of the gorge in dazzling sunshine. Many photos. A sight I'll never forget." And then Peter Frank, the same portage. They were really enjoying the habitats they were in. So September 4th, Peter, it was really quite beautiful. The sky cleared up completely and the portage was almost all dry. A pleasant walk over open prairie with the rapids thundering along, all white among the black rock. The most beautiful portage I have ever made and the most beautiful spot on the river so far. And a little bit more about carrying these packs on August 6th. My journal shows that Jim and I weighed our packs. He was carrying one of 50 pounds and one of 26. My big pack weighed 56 pounds and the other 26, so I had 82 pounds on my back, a figure I thought was impossible for me. We used a 50-pound spring fish scale to measure them, breaking up the 56-pound pack into 2 parts to weigh. And we were still moving stuff the next day, August 7th, 1966. After lunch, Jim and I went back to pick up the canoe and extra pack. It took us 3 hours to complete the round trip. We exchanged canoe and packs 4 or 5 times. Carrying the canoe was bad because of A, the yoke was horrible, and B, balancing the craft while wheeling one's way through bogs, rocks, etc. is difficult, besides all the black flies as well. But we got lucky at Grant Lake. Now, it's not often you see a journal that happens to have a candy bar wrapper in the middle of the journal. August 5th. The good thing that happened today was we ran into some people. 2 men were fishing the other side of the river at the outlet the inlet to Grant Lake, and when Don saw them, there was mutual shock. Their camp was opposite ours at the inlet to Grant. On my second load to the tent, I found 2 of them already visiting our camp. They were our fishermen flown in for a week and left on their own, would be picked up. Lake trout had presumably went up to 42 pounds with the last party, they told us. They told us that they were A, going out today, B, caribou were numerous and tame here, and C, they had surplus food and fuel, which they were going to trade back for cash. Instead of C, they're going to give us, or sell us, as I suggested, the extra equipment. Great. I told them of the previous list that we had submitted. I'll tell you more about that in the 4th video, and the list that we wanted a bush pilot to get for us. And I mentioned to them the chocolate bars, which one of them had on him. And he took pity on me. He gave me the chocolate bar. The wrapper of this tasty morsel is forever preserved here. The idea of having this luxury was far greater in taste value than the value itself. August 5th. Now that we have the prospect of plenty of food and about 10 days moving time left, psychologically we can relax. As I say, we were always, under pressure. We got to get out of this area before the winter hits. Now I can get up early and prepare my own breakfast without worrying about other people. Now we mightn't be able to hold a complete dehydrated dinner for four in one hand. August 7th. The twin-engine plane arrived yesterday through the thickening cloud cover and hasn't taken off since. Actually, it arrived, picked up that fisherman party, deposited a new one, and left. I didn't know that. So I said, selfish me, the longer those fishermen remain here, the more food they're eating, the less for us. August 8th. Visited the new group opposite us. There were 6 of them, and they made us quite comfortable. There were 3 dentists, 2 pharmacists, and a retired person who was running the camp. They opened a bottle of rye and finished it off very quickly among 2 of them and 3 of us. I had 2 cold beers, and finally, after staring at some real bread, asked to have a slice. We then had peanut butter, honey, and bread. Again, the idea of such a treat far exceeded the actual taste of the bread, though it was darn good. We picked up the supplies the other group left and found they took off the same day the plane arrived. And we stayed around because this group indicated that they probably would have surplus material for us as well. So on August 12th, we picked up from the second group a second supply batch of food. And Appendix 4 in the last video, I did a lot of audits and I put them in the journal. And you'll see the list of foods that we got. Also, Grant Lake finally provided opportunities for me to start taking nature pictures. It's not easy. It was not easy. I had a gun stock mount for a single lens reflex camera, so I had a powerful telephoto, and this was the first time I really was able to get close to caribou. And I took this shot, very proud of that, and I also took a picture of a ground squirrel. Tell you a little bit about ground squirrels. They show what's called Allen's rule. Allen's rule is an eco-geographical rule formulated by Joel, see that, Asaph Allen in 1877, broadly stating that animals adapted to cold climates have shorter limbs and bodily appendages than animals adapted to warm climates. So you look at a ground squirrel, an Arctic ground squirrel, the ears are almost not noticeable. Look how short the feet are. It's a roly-poly looking animal, an Arctic ground squirrels. This was taken at Grant Lake. All right, I want to spend some time at Marjorie Lake Inlet. If you've been following through these videos, you know I spent some time on the first video on the Moffat expedition. And I'm going to repeat a slide. That on 14th September 1955, Art Moffatt died of exposure to cold water immersion and freezing air temperatures on the Dubawnt River's inlet to Marjorie Lake. Others in the party of 6 canoeists could have also died that day. The trip has been baked into the lore of wilderness camping. Why the expedition found themselves in their predicament has been debated ever since, and that was this expedition was in the back of our minds in terms of the planning and execution, and certainly it was in the back of my mind. So I know you want to ask me, what was my experience with this stretch, the inlet to Marjorie, of the Dubawnt River? And the answer in the journal is that we have departed from the route of Tyrrell and presumably Moffat on our last leg. We are going into Marjorie Lake by a different way, avoiding a 400-yard portage and avoiding the area Moffat died of exposure and avoiding all the rapids. Why wouldn't anybody go this way? Tomorrow promises to be a wet day of walking. Lining the canoes is not feasible. So we looked at this other channel, the West Channel, and thought, we might have to walk it, but we could do that. The next day, August 19th. Didn't set the traps last night, and as a result rested comfortably until 9 a.m. We had a fish breakfast, big surprise, and left late. We walked very little, ran most of the 2-mile stretch before Marjory. That's it. So let me show you this in detail. So here are our campsites. On 8/18, we were at the West Channel going into Marjorie Lake, that's above there. On 8/19, we were at the outlet of Marjory. And I'm showing you a broad view because according to Sam, the bush pilot, on the way back from Aberdeen Lake on 31 August 1966, this is in my journal, there was some question as to where Moffat died. Said it was out of Marjorie Lake. That would be the outlet. And I say to myself, we'll have to reread his trip again in Sports Illustrated article of 59. In actuality, that's not where the accident happened. Instead, the accident happened at the end of the East Channel. And so there's a choice point here between going to the West Channel or the East Channel. Most of the Dubawnt River flows to the east. And that's certainly the route that Tyrrell chose, and Moffat was following Tyrrell's journal. So there's the West Channel, and there's the East Channel. John Sperry, who had a good correspondence with, indicated on this email query that he was going to try and get to that area in 2020. He tried to get to it in 2021. COVID stopped that. He's trying to get to it in 2022. He's not going to go along the East Channel, but he wants to go to the spot to pay his respects. As he calls it, we want to pay the respects at the scene of Moffat's tragic accident. And he did a lot of research on this, and he wanted to know for sure where the accident happened. But there's lots of information in this particular query. John Perry says that most trips take the less problematic Western Channel and miss this rapid. So it doesn't appear in many reports, any canoe trip reports. An exception is the 1983 Harmouth party, and they cite, quote, a vicious ledge rapid at this point, which I showed you in the map, which they say was not shown on their map. So they were just as surprised by this rapid as Moffat was, i.e. by JB Tyrrell's failure to note in his report or the map this rapid, as documented elsewhere on the website. And that's one of Alan Jacobs' complaint about who was ultimately responsible for the accident. Unlike Moffat, the Harmouth party wisely portaged this surprise rapid on the left. In Moffat's defense, however, we all know that ledge rapids can be practically invisible from above. Now you can say, well, that Harmouth party knew about the Moffat tragic rapid, and that's why they portaged, but that's not true, because the Harmouth party thought Moffat's accident occurred at the outlet of Marjorie Lake, which it did not. And if you go to Google Earth and blow up the East Channel, at the end of the East Channel, you will see something that looks rather dangerous. I don't know whether you could get by that on the east side or not of that white area. Certainly, Tyrrell, with 4 canoes, got through this area. If there's any damage to canoes, he usually mentioned it in his notebook but there's no mention of that. We're going to talk about his notebook in a second. So in part one of this video, and you should go back and look at that, I discuss Alan Jacobs' defense of Moffat. Jacobs believed that Moffat's major mistake the day of the accident was in trusting what Tyrrell had written about the area. But Jacobs was not privy to Tyrrell's notes, or Tyrrell notes, although Moffat was. And he made some conclusions. He also presented evidence from some of the survivors, what they remembered. So this is from Alan Jacobs. I think this is one of the appendixes on the bottom. On Lefever's interview on 29th of December, about 3 months after the accident, in the Amsterdam Evening Recorder. And this is very telling. So this is what he remembers. He says the river between Wharton and Marjorie Lakes splits up into 3 channels. The longest of these, and Jacobs says the rightmost, had been traveled by Tyrrell in his trip 60 years before and was described in his journal. There were 5 rapids, the first 2 rough but shootable, the third long and heavy, requiring a portage of a mile. Remember that, so there's a portage there on that east branch. And the last 2 apparently easy, for they were mentioned only as rapids. Because this route was described, we took it, being careful to look over the first 2 routes, I assume, which were indeed rough. Of course, that's the ones that everyone seems to go on. Hurrying as we were, no foolish chances were taken, but they didn't look over the one on the east side that they actually went on. So let's editorialize. He remembers that the river was split into 3 channels. You saw that there are only 2 channels that the Dubawnt River goes into. And then he says Tyrrell describes in his journal, he's not talking about the report, that there were 5 rapids. The third was the portage, that's fine. And there were 2 more after that, 2 apparently easy ones after that, for they were mentioned. Where were they mentioned? Must have been in the journal, only as rapids. So if we look at the notebooks, we could check that. Because this route was described, we took it, being careful to look over the first 2, etc. Hurrying as we were, and this is Jacob's emphasis, hurrying as we were, no foolish chances were taken. Well, if you look at the Tyrrell map, and you can see the portage here, and then the inlet of Lady Marjorie Lake, there are no rapids shown. That's true. I showed you Peter Frank interview on September 27th, who said that it was about 3 in the afternoon when the accident happened. We had been following a Canadian government survey map, which I assume is the Tyrrell map. I don't, if it's a different one, it might be, but I'm pretty sure it's the Tyrrell map, during the entire trip, and knew we were coming on the rapids. How did they know that on the map? The map doesn't show the rapids. But we had no idea what we really were in for. The map didn't show them as being very dangerous, but the map obviously showed them. So there's an inconsistency here. So let me speculate. We know from Alan Jacobs' correspondence with another of the survivors that Skip Pessel and Art had studied the journals carefully before setting out, and notations from the journals had been made on Art's maps. So it wasn't just the Tyrrell 1893 map that the Moffat party used, but the notations on that map. And my speculation is that, and if that map still exists, it could be checked, that the annotations say rapids. That's my speculation. Doesn't make any difference because we can go to the notes and actually find out what Tyrrell wrote. So the notebooks are available at the University of Toronto Library. I'm not sure why Alan Jacobs could not find them. He did not find them. He assumed that the notebooks, that's basically the journal, were identical to the report. I don't know why he would assume that. There's a lot more information in the notebooks. And we can ask three main questions. Where did Moffat get his Tyrrell information about rapids below the portage? Because it's not on his map, it's not on his report. Did Tyrrell mention two rapids below the portage? And did Tyrrell provide any further information about the rapids below the portage, such as a caution or warning? And the notebooks, as I indicated, are available on the University of Toronto website. We're looking at page 50. I've given you a link to that. And 51. And those two pages are for September 23rd and 24th, 1893. And I thank John Sperry for his insights into the Tyrrell notebook information as it pertains to the inlet to Marjorie Lake. I corresponded with him. I said, this is what I saw in the notebook. And John said, read it again. He said, your two assumptions about the numbers of rapids and what the information is not correct. So we're going to look at that. So to emphasize this, the Tyrrell party in 1893 camped at they spent 3 days finding this, where the Dubawnt River exited Wharton Lake. And on August 23rd, they moved through the East Channel and camped right below a rapid, very close to the entrance of Marjorie Lake. That's what we want to find out about. So on August 23rd, this is page 50, this reads logically. On August 23rd at Wharton Lake, he took a barometric pressure reading. That's what surveyors did. They measured elevation of the land by taking barometric pressures again and again and again. And so at 7 o'clock in the morning and at 9:40, he took a barometric pressure. It must have been in the campsite. And then they're on the lake. Takes another barometric pressure. And then he talks about running down to the bottom of the bay. He talks about rapids that they ran and the fall of the rapids. And then takes another measurement at 12:45 barometric pressure and talks about shallow lakes, etc. Okay? So this is a typical timeline. But then it gets messy. Now it's going to get messier, the timeline. We're going to look at the details in a second, but I want you to see that there's a lunch up there, there's a foot of rapids, there's a camp, and then there's another after lunch. In fact, this is August 23rd, and there's going to be 3 mentions of lunch on page 50 and 51. I don't think they had 3 lunches that day. And in fact, the bottom lunch does not show any reading for barometric pressure at all. I think instead that it should be obvious that this bottom lunch here, this paragraph, should go up there in terms of the timeline, because that's what, in terms of time, that's what he's referring to. So let's move it. Going to move it up, and I think it would make sense now, right? He has lunch at 1:30, takes a barometric reading. He probably is scouting those 2 rapids before the portage. And at 3:40, he then takes another barometric pressure. And he says, after lunch, we ran down the upper portion of the heavy swift rapid and made a portage of 400 paces long past the lower shallow portion, embarking on the edge of a sheet of ice. Remember, this is the end of August, a sheet of ice that was still frozen to the shore. The total fall in the rapid is about 20 feet. Now, it's interesting. At 3:40, Above this, he has a barometric reading, and then he also has foot of the rapids 340 as well. Maybe they had two barometric instruments. I don't think so. Um, they maybe rounded the times. The times are only shown with zeros or fives at the end of the time. But you can see the difference is that the barometric pressure went from 29.36 to 29.38 because now they were lower and there's more air above them. And that there are tables that correlate elevation to barometric pressure, and that increase of barometric pressure is equivalent to, I've calculated, 18.5 feet, which is about 20 feet. So now it kind of makes sense. Lunch, scouting, portage, foot of rapids. Okay? And at 4:40, they're still at the foot of the rapids. They're completing the portage. Then we have the camp. Well, let's move up this page. Let's move up the page. And looking at the second paragraph at the bottom, we're now from the foot of the rapid. Are there 2 foots of the rapid here? There's no barometric pressure reading. There's no time. No, I think that this didn't occur after camp, did not occur after camp, but it should be pushed back up there. That's where I think. So let's do that. Put a space for that paragraph, and this is going to be the important paragraph. And now we see on the top, foot of rapids, 340, still there, say at 440, moving now down the river toward Marjorie Lake. And from the foot of the rapid, we descended the river, which flowed with a swift current, even though it widened out very much and was filled with islands, to a swift rapid, which we were obliged to run 1 canoe at a time, camping after sundown at the foot of the rapid. So, how many rapids are there? After the portage, 1 rapid. And now it kind of makes sense. Let's look at that, obliged to run 1 canoe at a time. What does that mean? Well, if you look up a dictionary definition of obliged, if you're obliged to do something, you have to do it because the situation makes it necessary. And the situation is that it's a dangerous rapid. I think we could agree to that. And we're going to run the canoes 1 at a time. 1 canoe is going to go down the rapid and complete it. The next one is going to go down and complete it. And they all successfully did that. The Moffat group did not do that. The Moffat group had all 3 canoes, even though they were spaced apart, they all went over the hazardous part of that rapid. So where is the second rapids that everyone was talking about, all the survivors? And this is where I think the second rapid is mentioned. We are on page 51. And in fact, I'll show you the bottom of this. There's where August 24th is. So we're still on August 23rd on the top. And he's talking again about around the rapid near lunch. So there is the 3rd lunch that day. Maybe if you read it quickly, you would think, oh, well, there's another rapid. That's the second rapid after the portage. No, that's the rapid by the portage. So I think that's my speculation, that that's where the 2 portages or the 2 rapids come from. And my speculation is they ended up on the Tyrrell map. So where are they after they camped on the night of August 23rd? We look at August 24th. They did a barometric pressure reading at 6:05 in the morning, 7:15 in the morning. They're still there, it looks like, at lunchtime at 12:35. Looks like they're still there at 1:20. And then they leave. And just after leaving camp, we entered a long lake running off towards the northwest. And I think that's probably in Tyrrell's writing. He had someone transcribe his notes, and he probably proofed them. He put down Lady Marjorie Lake. I would kind of bet that that's his handwriting. And so this to me would make sense. So I think we've answered all these questions. Jacobs thought that the information that Moffat got was in 1955 from a correspondence with Tyrrell. That's not the case. There was only one rapids below the portage, I think. I can argue that. And there's more information about that rapids. More information. And my conclusion is that one contributing factor on the day of the accident was not noticing or following up on Tyrrell's notebook description of the rapids below the portage. It's certainly true that it wasn't in his map and it was not emphasized in his published report. Okay, let's get out here and let's start going to the final leg of our adventure. And I'm going to offer a reward for the outlet of Marjorie Lake. Lost single lens reflex camera back plus T-mount tube with excellent Arctic loon slide pictures. Do not open camera back. I don't know whether the film can be developed or not. It's slide film. August 20th, 1966. Marjorie Lake outlet. Nunavut Territory, Canada. Within a mile of blah, 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 near an ester and dirt beach in tundra. 8:20. Today started as a good day with my taking some beautiful pictures of Arctic loons, the best I shot all trip. On coming back to camp at 10:30 after being out since 7 a.m., I discovered the camera and part of the scope attachment had fallen off. Spent the remainder of today in a futile search for it. The last spot I remember having the setup was about a mile away. I made 4 round trips plus zigzagging looking. Roger was good enough to look also once. Kick myself. Never felt it slide off the gun stock. That scope, I've had that scope since I was 12 years old, 13. Saved up for that. I still have it. An old Bosch & Lomb bow scope. A T-mount could be fitted on the lens. The lens of the camera is removed, and you have a wonderful telephoto lens. But that camera is still up there someplace, maybe. So let's continue. The Harmouth party said at the outlet of Marjorie, just below the camp is the rapid where A. Moffat died in 1955. That's not true. We made a portage of about 100 meters on the right. Everybody makes portages. The rapid can be run without too much trouble, but thinking of Moffat and having only one canoe, we passed up the opportunity. We all think about Moffat when we go through this area. Below the rapids comes some 25 kilometers of an unnamed lake, etc. Well, what do? At the outlet of Lady Marjorie Lake, there's a portage that Tyrrell did, except he didn't do that for every canoe. The first one he ran. And here is 1893 pictures that Tyrrell made of this area. So I'll show you what's in his report here. This is Tyrrell's report. He says, I'll skip around, he says on the bottom, in descending this rapid, that's at the northwest angle of Lady Marjorie Lake, one of the canoes was badly broken on a stone, and he portaged the rest of them. And he called that Canoe Casse Rapid. Canoe Casse Rapid. So what do? So on August 19th, we looked at it, and Don found an Eskimo camp across the way that was basically a ring, not not real live Eskimos. A recently built house in the camp of the Thumb Party. Jim says this rapid is lineable with only a few easily manageable chutes. Tyrrell portaged this quarter mile when he tried to run it and broke one of his canoes. And then on, well, first I'm going to define what a portage is, because I'm not so sure what's happening. My idea of a portage is that you carry the boat or its cargo out of the river between the two navigable waters. We didn't portage it, we lined it, we walked it. So on 8/21, went out early to gather in the traps and try to recoup my losses by some pictures with a hybrid adapter. I used my lens and Roger's camera, which was not working 100%. We left camp about 9 o'clock and got through Canoe Casse about 9:50. Took me a while to figure out what my writing was like because I hadn't seen that report. Two chutes, both not hard, was the major obstacle. Unfortunately, in the process of walking, I got wet up to my shirt pockets. I never really dried out all day. The wool pants, socks, sweater, and cargo and overpants protected me from any cold effects during the day. The river broadens after the rapids into an unnamed lake. Okay. Now, the Dubawnt River turns to the northwest. There is a rapids there. After a pancake breakfast, we ran the rapids around the corner. The current was pretty swift and carried us quickly through the shallow water surrounded by high clay slopes. On the way, we saw an Arctic wolf who gave us the once-over. We reached Loudon Rapids and discovered a roaring river, but runnable by Tyrrell's standards. And I don't think he did actually run it. There's a portage there. We crossed to the other side of the river and made a portage over a long, high hill. After this, we had lunch and moved on. The wind was blowing strong, happily from a southern direction, and we made 5 miles with the current and the wind in 50 minutes. And all in all, we made 19 miles today. And the only reason we stopped was that there was a water pressure cabin there that we decided to spend the night in the cabin. So here is Tyrrell's map. He spells it London Rapids. We think it should be a Loudon Rapids. And look pretty dangerous. And then finally, we're at Aberdeen. Or actually on my way, because this is still August 22nd. It was nice thinking today that there will be no more portages and no more rapids. All the rest of our travel will be river-like travel. Our food situation is fair with practically no surplus food at all in case our plane is late a few days. Variety is lacking, however, and we are trying to vary our meals, i.e. putting our bacon bars in the soup. We had only a few breakfasts left since Don does not believe in pancakes without syrup, and we only have 4 syrups left. We might have to melt down the brown sugar for a sauce. I am going to run out of cocoa. I'm not a coffee drinker. Very shortly. After our meal tonight, we were still not full. Roger boiled up some dried fish and flour, and later we're going to open a freeze-dried raspberry can. Whoopee! And we reached Aberdeen Lake on 8/23. We were supposed to be picked up on 8/31. We were picked up on 8/31. So we got there a week early. And on August 23rd, we found a great deal of firewood on the islands at Beverly, and I spent much of the evening in front of a roaring log. What a priceless situation after not having any firewood at all for maybe a month. I can still smell the refreshing wood odor on my clothes. We broke up camp about 9 a.m. and made tremendous time arriving at our campsite because of the current. Non-stop for lunch at 3 p.m., a distance of 19 miles in, what did we do it in? We did it in 6 hours. The current certainly helped us today. We passed a camp at the Inlet of Aberdeen. I'll talk about that in the next. The last 3 miles were paddled in a thunderstorm. It added a final touch to our trip to arrive at our pickup point in this type of weather. We were wondering when the crud would get us, since our weather has been almost sinful since that 3-day storm. It's been so good. So we arrived at a wildlife service cabin, really a one-man affair, and we have set up the tent and put all our gear inside the tent. We will sleep in the cabin. Food-wise, the 2 items we are short on, sugar and fuel, are not here. Also not here are yeast and flour, which Jim had been hoping for. Very few main items are here. We used some of them, and we left a lot of material on the cabin. So the last day in the field, we set up the camera to take pictures of all 4 of us. Roger on the left, Jim Chilcott, myself, and Don Chant against the Aberdeen Lake and the barren grounds. And when we got back to Prince Albert, we weighed ourselves just to give you some indication of the effect of the trip on ourselves. And the weight loss was that Roger lost 10.5 pounds. I don't think Jim weighed himself. I was about the same weight, but Don really was lost weight, and you can see that if you saw the original pictures of him. He lost 21 pounds during the trip. And we had arranged to be picked up on that date, and lo and behold, and this is not our plane, but it is the type of plane. This is an otter. The otter appeared. It was just a wonderful sight to see. Picked us up on our 2 canoes and all our gear, and flew us back to Stony Rapids. So I still have another part to this talk, where I'm going to talk about the science that we did, Eskimo carving, people we met, and thank yous, a bunch more journal kind of summary entries, and then a set of appendices including what happened to us, and some lists that I have from my own journal. So I hope you're with us still on this incredible adventure for science, and see you on the next video.